an advocate for mental health and equality, and has worked with the AFL on its diversity and inclusion programs. He's the founder of the Pride Cup, an ambassador for Beyond Blue, and in 2017 was named Young Australian of the Year for Victoria. Rotarians and partners, please welcome Jason to the stage.
Good afternoon, my fellow Rotarians. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. Can I begin by extending a thank you to Mark and Bronwyn Stevens for this incredible opportunity. I'm really excited to talk to you today about the Pride Cup, but before I do that, let me share a little bit of my story. As a kid growing up in country Victoria, I loved playing footy more than anything else. And for those international people in the room, this is Aussie rules football. It's not soccer, it's not rugby, it's something we do here in Melbourne. But as I got older, the football club also felt like the one place that I would never be accepted for who I was. Words like faggot, poofter, and homo were all considered part of the game, whether it was coming from over the fence or coming from the opposition or my coach or even my own teammates. Every time I heard those words, it felt like a reminder that I wouldn't be accepted. I realized that I was gay when I was 13 years old, and at the time I thought that being gay was the worst possible thing that I could be. At school, the word gay was constantly used to mean bad, or weak, or stupid, or disgusting. And when I realized that that was me, or maybe what other people would think about me, it really crushed me. I made a promise to myself that I would never act on these feelings, that I would go through life, marry a woman, have kids and a family, and do all the things that society expects of me, and no one should ever know about who I really was. My journey to self-acceptance wasn't easy, but it was absolute. By the age of 16, I came to the realization that if I only live one time, I may as well do what makes me happy. I may as well be the person that I am and not worry so much about what other people think about me. But in the end, most people didn't think less of me. My friends accepted me, my family accepted me, but the football club was different. In that environment, because of that homophobic language, I thought if my teammates found out that I'd be kicked off the team. Maybe I wouldn't be able to play football anymore, which was the game that I loved. So I went to great lengths to hide my sexuality while I was growing up playing football. And to give you an idea of what that was like, I would second guess everything that I said or did. I wouldn't get involved in conversations about relationships or what I was doing on the weekend. And I even went to the extent of creating a separate Facebook list so that just my football teammates wouldn't see photos I was tagged in, places I was checked into, or what my relationship status was. It probably limited the kinds of friendships and bonds that I could have developed with my teammates because I was always hiding a big part of my life. But I had made a promise that if I was ever asked about it, that I wouldn't lie. Lying hadn't gone so well in the past when it came to making up stories about girls. Firstly, I had no idea what I was talking about. And secondly, it's exhausting to maintain fabricated stories with all of the follow-up questions that come the next week. But I would use words like they and them instead of he or she to try and get around it. And I can remember really clearly the first time that it came up in conversation with one of my teammates. I was 22 years old. We were in the club rooms after training one night, and one of my teammates had broken up with his girlfriend. I asked him what had happened and how he was doing because I knew both of them, and after a bit of back and forward, he put it back onto me, and he said, "What about you, Bally? Aren't you seeing someone at the moment?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm seeing someone." And my teammate said, "Well, what's his name?" And my heart started beating really fast. I thought, maybe he was testing me, maybe it was just a joke. And I said, "His name is James." My teammate said, "Well, has he come to any football matches yet?" And I said, "No, he hasn't." And he goes, "Oh, we should bring him down. It'd be really great to meet him." And this just felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. And one by one, conversations like this kept happening in my football club where my teammates would reach out to me to say, "We know that you're gay and it's not a big deal to us." It turned out after 10 years there was only so much that I could hide. But all the fears that I had about how my teammates were going to react to me weren't realized. Part of me felt silly for thinking that I'd had to hide it for so long. But I came to the realization that a lot of the homophobic language and behavior coming from my teammates growing up wasn't actually coming from a place of hatred towards me or towards people who were gay, but rather it was coming from a place of ignorance and not understanding the impact that that language would be having on one of their own teammates. And at this part in my football journey, I'd never felt more part of the football club than I had in my whole life. I could be my whole self. I could talk about anything. I played better as a result. The homophobic language faded from the vocabulary of my teammates. It became real to them that that would have a negative impact on me, and they need me to be at my best so that we can win games of football. So what's the logic in that? And at this moment, I reflected on the fact that there are no openly gay male AFL players in the history of AFL football. And I also learned that young people who are same-sex attracted are up to 6 times more likely to contemplate suicide when compared to the rest of the community. And it made me think about when I was young, struggling to come to terms with who I was. If I had have known of such thing as a gay footballer, if I had have known that he could be out to his teammates and that it wouldn't be a big deal, that would have made a really big difference to me. And so that was my motivation to share my story. Now, before I did that though, I thought it was important to talk to my football club. One thing to be an individual sports person in swimming or diving, but football is a team sport. I didn't want to politicize my football club or speak on behalf of them if they didn't feel comfortable with that. But when I approached the club with this idea, to my surprise, they told me to go for it. They said, we know this is something you're passionate about. We know that you and the other guys can handle the extra attention, so we'll support you no matter what. And so my story was published in the Sunday Age all the way back in 2012. And the photograph that they used in the piece was me in the change rooms tying up my footy boots. One of my teammates was also photographed sitting next to me. And on the day, he said that his mum called him up to say that she was so proud that his photo was in the paper and it wasn't for breaking the law. It was the way that my teammates reacted on this day that meant more to me than anything else. I didn't know if the story would get much extra media pickup because I'm just a country footy player. I've never played football at the elite level, but in the absence of any elite players talking about this, my story kind of filled that void. And sure enough, all 4 television networks rocked up to footy practice and they wanted to get some interviews. They also wanted to interview my teammates, and I hadn't briefed them on that, and they hadn't done any media training, and nor had I, by the way. But I remember feeling incredibly proud when one of my teammates put up his hand and he's like, yep, no worries, Bally, I'll talk to the press. And he strutted out in front of the media scrum and said some of the most perfect cliches of acceptance that I couldn't have written better for him. He's like, when we cross that line, we're all one team. I think a lot of other players could take a leaf out of Bally's book. Yarra Glen, we support Jason 110%. Not long after that, I was invited to lead Pride March in Melbourne, which was a real honour, but to me, the heroes of that story were my teammates from Yarra Glen who came and marched by my side. I was joined as well by AFL players Daniel Jackson and Brock McLean, who became the first AFL players to ever take part in this event. And I thought this was a really significant moment to have not only people who are straight, but to have footy boys marching in a gay Pride March. It broke down a lot of stereotypes. And I think in a way it gave permission to other people in our community, especially young men, to know that saying no to homophobia doesn't make you less of a man. It means that you're a good bloke. It means that you're sticking up for your mates. And I think those are the values that anyone can get on board with. And up until this day, I hadn't been one to wave the rainbow flag. I didn't necessarily know about the history of Pride and its place in the LGBTI community, but I came to understand that the reason that the LGBTI community celebrate Pride is because pride is the opposite of shame. And shame was what I felt when I was 13 years old and figured out that I was gay. Shame is what so many in the LGBTI community have been made to feel for generations just because of who they are, because of discriminatory laws, because of attitudes in society. And so that's why we celebrate Pride, so that we can tell people to be proud of who they are, as opposed to ashamed of who they are. And so that we can build community and resilience in the face of that isolation and discrimination. And a few years after I came out, my local football club at Yarra Glen came up with the idea to hold what we called the Pride Cup. We wanted to theme one of our home games around celebrating inclusion and diversity so that every player and official and supporter knew that they didn't have to choose between being themselves and the game that they love. We painted our 50-metre line rainbow, the international symbol for LGBTI pride. We created rainbow jumpers and presented the Pride Cup to the winning team. We also worked with the AFL to create the first ever education programs, especially for players, to help them challenge homophobia so that more LGBTI people can access the health and wellbeing benefits that come from community sport. And the whole town of Yarra Glen got on board. These rainbow panels were made by the local men's shed, paid for by the Chamber of Commerce, and they were displayed in the main street of Yarra Glen on the weekend of the Pride Cup. We got national media coverage, and the crowd on the day was 4 times the size of a normal game of country footy, and many who attended were part of the LGBTI community, and they said that they felt welcome for the first time at a country footy match. Those of you who follow the AFL, or in particular follow St Kilda or Sydney, you'll know that in 2016, the AFL took this initiative to the national level. We saw the 50-metre line at Etihad Stadium painted rainbow, and rainbow incorporated into the jumpers and the socks of the players on the day. They also paid homage to the fact that this was something that came from the grassroots. My teammates in their rainbow jumpers formed the Guard of Honour when the Saints players ran out onto the ground, and I got my face on the cover of the Footy Record. My favourite story, though, leading into this game revolved around this man. I hope that some of you will know who this is or know this photo. This is Nicky Winmar. 20-odd years ago, Nicky Winmar, as an Aboriginal player, and many Aboriginal players playing AFL, had copped a lot of racist abuse while playing the game of AFL football. At one point, it got too much for Nicky. He lifted up his jumper and pointed to his skin, I guess in an act of defiance to say, "I'm proud of who I am." I think that's also the bird that he's flipping them there, but I digress. This photograph was captured by the Herald Sun. It was on the front page. It marked a real turning point around the conversation about racism in the game of AFL football. Now, leading into the Pride game, not a lot of people knew until this moment that Nicky Winmar has a gay son. And so in all of the football talkback leading into that game, we had Nicky Winmar, as a legend of the St Kilda Football Club, talking about his love for his gay son, and how, as someone who took that iconic stand against racism all those years ago, that the next frontier to making our game inclusive and welcoming for everyone is to challenge homophobia. And for those of you who follow the AFLW, which is absolutely fantastic, you would have known last year that Carlton and the Western Bulldogs incorporated the Pride game into their sport as well, which I think is just as important. For a couple of reasons, if I've got time, I'll go into it. Women in sport cop probably the opposite stereotype to men. What I mean by that is that the stereotype is that gay men don't or can't play sport. The stereotype for women, if you play a rough contact sport like football, then you must be a lesbian. Both are not true. There are very many gay men who play sport, including some gold medal Olympians. There are very many straight women who play AFL, which is great. But both of these stereotypes are damaging in terms of people feeling like they need to be in the closet. A lot of AFLW players who I'm friends with, when the game went national, went back into the closet. They deleted photos off their Instagram accounts of their partners because they were worried that this wouldn't be palatable for a national audience. Would parents not let their daughters play the game of AFL if they knew that lesbians played it, as if that was a bad thing? But that all changed when, within the AFLW, a player called Erin Phillips, who won the best and fairest in the first year, was a standout player. And when she won the best and fairest, the equivalent of the Brownlow Medal, she got up on stage and dedicated the award to her wife, Tracy. And it was her wife, Tracy, who, when she was pregnant with twins, decided that she'd support Erin to move from America to Australia so she could pursue her goal of playing AFL football. And this marked a turning point because after this moment, absolutely nothing happened. She didn't lose her sponsorship deal. She wasn't sidelined by the fans. And it was from that moment that many more female players who are gay and play football felt comfortable to be themselves. Now, 5 years since that first Pride Cup in my hometown of Yarra Glen last year, we had over 10 Pride Cups played across Victoria, each one more powerful than the last. I don't think any other event has put LGBTI people and allies and those rainbow colours on the front pages of regional papers quite like the Pride Cup. In Hamilton, many LGBTI people I know who grew up there told me that they had a terrible time coming out, but they went back to their hometown for the Pride Cup, and when they did, they felt accepted with rainbow messages in every shop window. In Gippsland, even the local power station lit up their cooling towers with rainbow light on that weekend. Now, I know that there are more towns and more communities across Australia who want to hold a Pride Cup, and I am ready to bring it to them. So, to do this, last year, we created Pride Cup Australia, a new non-profit organisation to help any sporting club at any level in any code to host their own Pride Cup and the associated education programs that go with them. Our vision is a world where LGBTIQ people feel included and accepted, and we believe that sport has the power to get us there. Now, when it comes to the lessons from Pride Cup, I believe that they can be applied equally to any organisation. And yes, absolutely, I believe that there are lessons here for Rotary. Last year, led by my club of Paran, Rotary marched in Pride March for the first time. And I want to say a special thank you to Bronwyn, to Susie, to Grant, to Alexei, to John, to Stephen, who did a lot of the heavy lifting around making that happen. In the corner there, amongst the flags, you'll notice that the Pride flag is among them. And I want to leave you with 3 key things that I've learned in my work through the Pride Cup, through promoting inclusion and diversity, that I think you can take away today for Rotary. The first one is the power of language. Whether it's using the word gay as an insult or the kinds of homophobic language that I mentioned earlier, not using this language, challenging other people when they use this language is both easy, but it also goes a huge way towards ensuring that LGBTIQ people feel welcome. Secondly, the power of a personal story. And I think you guys at Rotary already get this, but I wanted to share my story with you here this afternoon because it's through the sharing of stories that you can build empathy and understanding. It's through the sharing of stories that we can both celebrate our differences but create an emotional connection through our shared humanity. And lastly, the power of allies. I think clearly demonstrated by my football teammates at Yarra Glen, from those AFL players who took a stand. It's up to the friends, the family members, the work colleagues, the football teammates of LGBTIQ people to not just challenge homophobia. We need you to be more than neutral or silent on this matter. What we need from you is to be visible and to be proactive in celebrating diversity. That's what we do with the Pride Cup in sport. That's what we all have the power to do in many different ways in our lives, because a culture where people feel proud to be themselves, whether on the sporting field, in the workplace, at school, or in their local Rotary club, is a culture that thrives and succeeds. Thank you so much for this opportunity.